I'm Sherry Burton, and I have been involved with Shakespeare on the Sound sort of from its beginning, and I've worn various and sundry hats. And I won't bore you with all that. But we also have here another former board member, or are you a current board member? Former, two formers, Dulcie Brainerd. And I'm just delighted to greet you and to introduce to you Mark Schenker. As we were driving over here, my husband was reading this little brief bio, and it says Mark Schenker has been at Yale College since 1990, and he said, "Oh my gosh, it's taken him a long time." However, be very serious, he is the current Senior Associate Dean of the college and Dean of Academic Affairs at Yale. Big jobs. Was born and raised in New York City, got his PhD in English literature from Columbia, taught at Columbia, NYU, and our own Trinity College in Hartford. He's led books discussions around the state for over 25 years under the aegis of the Connecticut Humanities Council, and he lectures frequently on literary topics for public audiences, sort of like this tonight. In 2001, he won the Wilbur Cross Award for Outstanding Humanities Scholar. So, with that, I'm going to tell you that Mark Schenker will undoubtedly tell you something that you don't know about Romeo and Juliet. Mark.
So, if you want to read along with us or follow along, you should have a book. We've got plenty. So the logic of this event, which will go a little over an hour, is that on the advance man for the performance that are going to be of Romeo and Juliet by the Shakespeare on the Sound Company. And the idea is that if I say something play, especially the play as you would see it in performance, and if some of you will volunteer to read selected scenes this evening, you'll get a feel of the play, even if you've studied it, read it a long time ago, and maybe even if you've seen it or read it lately. So Romeo and Juliet dates the early period of Shakespeare's career. We feel it was written around 1594 and 95. Only his the year before Titus Andronicus' rousing failure. And so it was generally believed that he changed tactics, and instead of writing a tragedy of character, he writes a tragedy of circumstance. Romeo and Juliet's problem is not so much about the kind of people they are, but the families they were born into. Their family feud is their fate. It was written at the time that Shakespeare was deeply involved in sonnet writing, so it's not surprising it would be about love. There are sonnets embedded in the play, and much of the play, I feel like this is going in and out, much of the play is written in verse, and much of the verse rhymed, which is unusual. About 80% of the play is, much of the verse is rhymed. It's written at the same time of his early comedies, Lost. So one of the things that's distinctive about Romeo and Juliet, and one of the things that makes it not one of the great masterpiece tragedies of Hamlet, Othello, Macbeth, and King Lear, is that it's a mixed mode play. It has lyricism of young love. It has some wacky comedy, not just witty comedy, but comic relief. And it has this tragic, elegiac sense from the very beginning that they're doomed. We're not just told that they're star-crossed, but that death oversees the play. People coming to see a play about young lovers would expect to see a comedy, except that Romeo and Juliet is called the tragical history, and people knew of the substance of the story from a poem published in 1562, so a generation before the play, by Arthur Brooke, which is called The Tragical History of Romeus and Juliet. And the idea that you could tell a tragic story about young lovers in a poem was acceptable, but that you were writing a tragic play about young lovers was something that was new. Again, young lovers are typically the substance of comedy. So you have the mixture of comedy, the tragedy of fate, and the lyricism of the romance. That's, I think, what makes the play distinctive. Part of the tragedy, and the friar Lawrence says to Juliet before she kills herself, "A greater power than we can contradict hath thwarted our intents." Most mature tragedy is a combination of circumstance and character. There's something wrong with Hamlet, Macbeth, King Lear, Othello. But what is wrong with them is not the whole source of their tragedy. There's something rotten in Denmark, in Britain, in Venice. And it's the combination of character and circumstance that leads to the great tragic plays. In this play, it's much more an issue of circumstance. You can say that Romeo and Juliet are foolish and young and impetuous, but the real problem in the play is the feuding of the family. Tragedy always has a loss and a gain. The loss in this play is several lives, not just Romeo and Juliet, Paris, Tybalt, Mercutio. Romeo's mother dies of a broken heart when he's exiled. Half a dozen people die, 5 of the 6 of them on stage. A terrible accumulation of loss. But the gain is that the families won't be feuding anymore. And if you think that's a minor exchange, the families not feuding may be saving scores or hundreds of lives. And what makes it tragic is you can't do the math. You can't say, oh, Cordelia's dead, Lear has lost his mind, but he understands about the power of love. You recognize that something has been lost in tragedy and something has been gained. It's impossible to do bean counting. That's what makes it tragic. That's what makes it so awe-inspiring. So there is a tension in the play between, as I said, these comic elements and the tragic elements. What are the comic elements? Young lovers, lots of comic banter, the notion of the young opposing their parents. In many plays, that's going to be the hallmark of comedy. Midsummer Night's Dream, Twelfth Night, even The Merchant of Venice has the daughter opposing the father. That's a comedy. Lots of verbal wit, lots of poetical, paradoxical expression. Romeo's lovesickness at the end of the play, all he can think about is Rosaline. We never see her, but in the beginning of the play, he's typed as a kind of lovesick hero. His extreme fickleness, as soon as he sees Juliet, he forgets about Rosaline. Juliet's separation from her parents and from the nurse and her opposition to them is a hallmark of comedy. And yet the play is overwhelmed by its tragic elements. What are those? The feuds between the houses, which engenders a whole range of elemental oppositions. And by elemental, I mean primitive, basic, not nuanced. Romance and revenge, love and hate, youth and age, life and death, day and night. Peacemaking Benvolio, his name means goodwill in Italian, and the peace-hating Tybalt. Tybalt says, I hate that word. So why is it that this mix of comedy and tragedy should produce such a great play? Well, tragedy is elemental in the sense that there's life and there's death. You might pretend to be dead by taking a potion, but either you're dead or you're not. There's no third way. But in comedy, there are lots of exceptions. You can pun. You can be married to Juliet and not have people know you're married, which is part of Romeo's circumstances. The whole idea of poetry, of metaphor, of paradox, of punning means that something can be something that it's not. Poetry makes other options possible, but poetry cannot, in the end, win out against the elemental notions of life and death, day and night, revenge and romance. So, when Mercutio and Tybalt are fighting, and Romeo tries to prevent that, it's because he's just married Juliet in secrecy. If the families weren't feuding, he could say to Tybalt, I'm your relation now, please don't fight. And Tybalt might be persuaded to accept him. But because the fate, the circumstances, is that the marriage must be kept secret, Romeo cannot tell Tybalt that the reason he doesn't want him to fight is that they're related. His enemy is now his kinsman, But because they're from warring families, he can neither tell Tybalt nor Mercutio what's going on. So here's the thing. In your mind, in poetry, in your point of view, you can both be related to somebody and not. But you can't act as both letting the two men fight and not letting them fight. I want to make that clear. You can have mixed emotions about Iago. You can say that in Othello, Iago is much more interesting a character than Othello. Maybe you won't say that. I'll say that. Othello's a nice guy, but he's dull. Iago is villainous, but terribly interesting. He's a kind of dramatist and stage manager. When you watch the play, you can have this mixed emotion. You know he's a bad person, but you enjoy seeing him operate the same way people like to see villains in a movie. And there's no conflict in that doubleness. But you cannot both let him do something and not let him do something. If it were real life and you were dealing with Iago, you'd have to worry that he might move into your neighborhood or start dating your sister. So tragedy says either you are or you aren't, and comedy says wait a while, it'll change. And what happens in this play is it doesn't matter how long you wait. The families don't change their position until after the young lovers are dead. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at 3 scenes this evening, early, middle, and late. And one of the scenes is going to be where Romeo and Juliet first meet and kiss twice. Then we're going to look at that turning point scene where Tybalt, who is on the Capulet side, the Juliet side, is out to pick a fight with Mercutio because he's angry with Romeo, because Romeo crashed the party the night before. And Romeo, as we know, is married now to Juliet and is a relation. When Romeo does not allow the fight to go on and intervenes, he gives Tybalt a chance. How many of you have read or seen the play recently? So this summary will help. He gives Tybalt a chance, unethically, to stab Mercutio under Romeo's arm. That is, Romeo's intervening leads to his friend Mercutio's death. When he sees that happens, he feels, Romeo, that he has been denatured, he has been unmanned by what he calls his lenity. We'd call it leniency. He's been too soft. And he toughens himself then to attack Tybalt. And when he kills Tybalt, he has both caused the death of his friend Mercutio, and he has now killed his wife's cousin. He's abandoned his family's honor and kills a kinsman who does not know that he and Romeo are related by marriage. And when that happens, he says, "Oh, I am fortune's fool." The doubleness that makes punning and poetry possible has now caught him up, that he is both a relative to Tybalt and his murderer. That doubleness becomes tragic, as in Hamlet. Hamlet's father appears as a ghost and says, "Your uncle killed a king. You have to avenge my death." Hamlet Jr. says, "What do I do, Pop? You have to kill a king." Wait a minute. In order to avenge the killing of a king, I have to kill a king? What a fool am I? That's the tragedy. There's no way out. Hamlet, who's a Renaissance man stuck in a medieval play, is told that he has to kill somebody, even though he's a scholar and a dramatist, a poet, not a killer. In this play, Romeo wants to be a lover and winds up a killer. So we are going to look at those 2 scenes, and then finally the scene in the tomb where Romeo is coming because he has heard that Juliet is dead. Juliet is only pretending to be dead. She's taken a potion given to her by Friar Lawrence, who has a specialty about these kinds of things, in order for her to seem dead so she can avoid a marriage with Paris. Why? Because the marriage to Romeo has been kept a secret. Again, the feud is at the root of everything. Romeo was supposed to be told by a colleague of Friar Lawrence, Friar John, that it's only pretend. Friar John could not get out of Verona to Mantua because there was a quarantine. And because of the quarantine, the message never gets to Romeo. There's the tragedy of circumstance. Not Romeo's fault, not Friar Lawrence's fault, not Juliet's fault. Romeo comes, sees Juliet dead, tries to takes a poison that he has bought from an apothecary. Apparently, there are lots of people in Italy who know how to make potions, at least in the 16th century. He dies of actual poison. Romeo wakes up in time, Juliet wakes up in time to see him dead, tries to drink some of the potion, there's no more left. She stabs herself with Romeo's knife. And the end of the play, the families vow not to fight anymore in the wake of their death. We'll look at that scene in the tomb, and especially Paris's role in it. I'd like to point out that Romeo and Juliet are not just two young kids. She's not quite 14. He's 16. They are very different characters. Romeo is an idealist. When he intervenes in the fight between Tybalt and Mercutio, you see his idealism, that he thinks he can stop them just by telling them. His infatuation with Rosaline is part of his idealism, his lovesickness. He dies because he believes that Juliet is dead. He's taken in by that appearance. Juliet is the realist in the play. She's the one who deceives her father and mother and her nurse. You know, adolescence. She's the one who has the courage, despite her many fears, to drink the potion she's been given. She wonders whether it will actually put her to death. She worries that it may not work. It may not actually make her look like she's pretending death. And so she keeps a knife by her side because she tells us as she drinks the potion, she gets rid of her family, they know nothing about it. This is a scene, she says, I must play alone, punning on the idea of the actor playing the young girl, playing the part. This is a scene that I must play alone, and if the potion doesn't work, she's going to kill herself. She's the one in the end of the scene when Friar Lawrence is so spooked by the noise in the tomb who says she'll stay, even though he says, let's run away. She's a realist and in some ways even more mature than Romeo. They do mature in the play. They're not just stock figures. Romeo moves from stereotypical lovesickness through true devotion to Juliet to a resignation to his fate as fortune's fool. Juliet moves from a girl dependent on her nurse and her parents to a young woman aware in the balcony scene that their vows, they only met that same night, and Romeo wants to get married, and Juliet is the one who says our vows would be too rash, too unadvised, too sudden. Let's wait, till tomorrow. It is still a play. So, in the scenes that we're going to be looking at, I'll need a handful of people in each case to read the scenes. I know you're reading the part cold, but you'll take some comfort in the fact that I'll be interrupting you often, not to criticize your reading, but to make points about what we're hearing. You do not have to read dramatically. The roles are not gender specific, but it is helpful if you actually read the words that are on the page. One piece of advice I can give you to read better is read slowly, because you'll be a better reader if you read slowly. So the first scene we're going to look at in the Dover is on page 19. This is Act 1, Scene 5, when Romeo's kinsmen have convinced him to come to Capulet's house, not to see Juliet, who they're not even aware of, but because Rosaline is supposed to be there, and Benvolio is convinced that if Romeo sees Rosaline again, he'll get over his lovesickness. Romeo, by contrast, can't wait to see her, and the irony, of course, is that he's captivated as soon as he sees Juliet. So we're going to start near the bottom of page 19, 3 lines up. I will be the servant who has the one line, I know not, sir, but I need 5 other readers. Will someone be our Romeo?
Richard over there.
Any gender. How about we let people volunteer themselves? So we need a Romeo. Thank you. We need a Tybalt. We have one. You have to remember your parts. I'm not going to remember. We need a Capulet. Capulet, Papa Capulet. Old man Capulet, thank you. We need a Juliet. Any gender? Yes, I've never gotten a man to do Juliet. We need a nurse. Okay, if anyone behind me wants to volunteer, just shout out. I'm happy to take volunteers. So we have those 5 parts. Benvolio also has one line. I'll take that. And remember, Romeo is there because Benvolio wants him to be unstuck in love with Rosaline, and instead he's going to meet Juliet and set the whole play in motion. It's a mask. People are wearing masks. They're dancing. And when Capulet, where's old man Capulet? Okay, when Capulet speaks, you'll see that his attention is divided at one point between his anger at Tybalt, who is acting like Romeo should be thrown out, and Capulet is trying to be a generous host, and he's both scolding Tybalt for being bad and trying to talk to his party guests. So you'll see that he's talking in two directions. Later in the play, Juliet is on the balcony, and she's having one kind of conversation with Romeo and another conversation with the nurse who's inside. That's the doubleness. I love you, honey. Yes, I'm coming. And yet that, well, you can both talk to Romeo and the nurse, but you can't both be Romeo's wife and not be his wife. You can't. Hamlet can say to be or not to be for years, but he can't both do what his father wants and not do it. That's tragedy. Antigone is told by her uncle, the king, if you bury your brother who is a traitor to the state, whose body is lying outside of the walls of the city, you'll be executed or exiled. And she says, but he's my brother. I have to give him funeral rites. Her brother can be both her brother and an enemy of the state. That doubleness is possible. But she can't both bury and not bury him. That's the tragedy. You can be double in your mind, in your point of view, in your sensibility. You can't act doubly. You can talk to the nurse, and you can talk to Romeo. Capulet can talk to Tybalt and scold him, and he can welcome his friends. But he can't both do and undo something. That's the heart of tragedy. So the Montagues come in, and the servant, Romeo, begins with, what lady's that? About 5 lines up.
What lady's that, which doth enrich the hand of yonder knight?
I know not, sir.
Oh, she doth teach the torches to burn bright. It seems she hangs upon the cheek of night, like a rich jewel in an Ethiop sphere, beauty too rich for use, the earth too dear.
You notice the couplets.
She shows a snowy dove trooping with crows, as yonder lady o'er her fellow shows. Adventure done, I'll watch your place of stand, and touching hers, make blessed my rude hand. Did my heart love till now, or swear it right sight? For I ne'er saw true beauty till this night.
So at this point in the play, he's just switched allegiances. And all of a sudden, she's going to make him blessed as he watches her stand after dancing. No more mention of Rosaline. If you didn't know that it was Romeo and Juliet, you'd say this is just another phase he's going through. But this is the real one. This is the one that's going to count. Tybalt.
This, by his voice, should be a Montague. Fetch me my rapier, boy. What dares the slave come hither covered with antic face, to fleer in scorn of our solemnity? Now, by the stock and honor of my kin, to strike us dead, I hold it not a sin.
So Tybalt doesn't know that it's Romeo by his face. He's wearing a mask, but he knows by the voice. You notice he doesn't speak in rhyme or couplets until the last 2 lines, which is commonplace in Shakespeare. Many speeches end, especially in a play that is largely verse, with a couplet rhyme because it gives it a kind of epigrammatic force. Now, by the stock and honor of my kin, to strike him dead, I hold it not a sin. But of course, this is completely errant and unethical. Even if he wasn't invited, Romeo is now a guest in the Capulet's house. Tybalt shows himself way out of line with any sense of ethical behavior.
Why, how now, kinsman, wherefore storm you so?
Uncle, this is a Montague, our foe, a villain that is hither come in spite, to scorn our solemnity this night.
Young Romeo, is it?
'Tis he, that villain Romeo.
So I'm going to stop again. You notice they complete a couplet, so, foe, spite, night. When Capulet says, this is Juliet's father, young Romeo is it, and you see the half line, followed immediately below it by an indented half line. That's Shakespeare or the compositor's way of signaling that that half line of Tybalt follows immediately. There's no beat. It's as if they spoke one line. Young Romeo is it, and before Capulet can have a beat or a breath, 'tis he, that villain Romeo. You'll see many times in the play, look down a little bit, when Tybalt says, I'll not endure him, Capulet says, he shall be endured. I'm not directing my actors tonight. I'm not a director. And the play, the performance will do what it chooses. But when Tybalt says, I'll not endure him, The fact that it's a half line followed by an indented half line means that Capulet says immediately, he shall be endured. And you recognize that the pace has accelerated of the argument between the two because of the half lines. Later on, you'll see that Romeo and Juliet complete each other's lines. It's the same notion of not always being in tune, but being very accelerated.
And aren't those lines, they add up to I understand?
They do. But there are some half lines that are followed by half lines that are not indented. And then there's a pause. You'll see a half line and it'll say they fight. And you realize that what's taking up time is the fight. But when you see a half line followed by an indented half line, it's immediately thereafter. So Capulet.
Content thee, gentle coz, let him alone. He bears him like a portly gentleman. And to say truth, Verona brags of him to be a virtuous, well-governed youth. I would not for the wealth of all this town, here in my house, do him disparagement. Therefore be patient, take no note of him. It is my will, the which if thou respect, show a fair presence, and put off these frowns, and ill-beseeming semblance for a peace.
So I stop again to say, Romeo is given credit by the fact that all Verona brags him to be virtuous and well-governed youth, and this report comes from the head of the opposing household. So we know something about Romeo from this. It also tells you that the older generation is more temperate than the younger generation, which is a hallmark of tragedy. The hallmark of comedy is old people don't know anything, that's why the young people run away and get married. When there's a tension in a play that's a comedy between the old and the young, comedy is on the side of the young. Comedy wants marriages because it wants babies. And it wants babies because comedy believes that change is good, and one of the ways you make change is through generation. Sex. Tragedy says it doesn't matter how many new generations there are. The elemental conditions of life are the same. You live for a while, and in the end, said John Maynard Keynes, you're all dead. And so in tragedy, the older generation has the wisdom, has the long view. Capulet shows himself to be a more temperate man than his nephew Tybalt. In the play, the rashness of the youth, including Romeo and Juliet, are going to set things akilter.
It fits when such a villain as he gets. I'll not endure him.
He shall be endured. What, goodman boy, I say, he shall. Go to. Am I the master here, or you? Go to. You'll not endure him. God shall mend my soul. We'll make a mutiny among my guests, and we'll set cock-a-hoop. You'll be the man.
Why, uncle, 'tis a shame.
Go to, go to. You are a saucy boy. Is it so indeed? This trick may chance to scathe you. I know what. You must contrary me, marry, 'tis time. Well said, my hearts. You're a
Princox, Prince of the Cocks.
You are Princox.
Yep.
So, be quiet, or more light, for shame. I'll make you quiet. What? Cheerly, my hearts.
So there's that divided scene. Again, we're at a disadvantage because we're not seeing it played. Why, uncle, 'tis a shame. Go to, get out of here. You're a saucy boy. Saucy in Elizabethan time was a much more negative notion, in the same way that naughty could be more like wicked. This trick may chance to scathe you, I know what. You must contrary me. And then he says, marry 'tis time. He's talking to someone else. He's talking to servants or helpers. You must contrary me, marry 'tis time. Well said, my hearts. Well done, whoever he's talking to, maybe the musicians. You are a princox. Go, be quiet, or more light, for shame. Let's have a good time. I'll make you quiet. My point is not how you direct it. My point is it shows you the division between him trying to be a gracious host and him having to deal with this unruly relative who's going to be the spring for the tragedy later on. Say again? Because you're supposed to see the play produced by the Shakespeare and the Sound Company and not read it. I want to say plays generally are written to be performed, not read. And first of all, this is for the purpose of this evening. This is a very disposable copy. A better copy would have stage directions. But my advice always is, if you want to read the play to get the general feel of it, and then see it in performance, and then read it again. When you read it again, you'll remember not just how it was directed, you'll remember intonations and costumes and staging. Yeah, I want to say, read Shakespeare, but better to see it than read it, and not just because I'm here for the company. Better to see a play than read it. Yeah.
Patience perforce with will overpower meaning makes my touch tremble in the differently. I will withdraw, but this intrusion shall now seeming sweet convert to bitterest gall.
And there are the couplets again, and you feel the force that it is going to begin sweet. These two people are going to fall in love and then be converted to bitterest gall because it's a tragedy.
If I profaned my unworthiest hand, this holy shrine, the gentle fine is this, my lips, two blushing pilgrims, ready stand, to smooth that rough touch with a tender kiss.
Good pilgrim, you do wrong your hands too much, which manner of devotion shows in this. For saints have hands that pilgrims' hands do touch, and palm to palm is holy palmer's kiss.
Have not saints lips, and holy palmers too?
Aye, pilgrim, lips that they must use in prayer.
Oh, then, dear saint, let lips do what hands do. They pray, grant thou, lest faith turn to despair.
Saints do not move, though grant for prayer's sake.
Then move not, while my prayer's effect I take. Thus from my lips, by thine my sin is purged.
He kisses her.
Then have my lips the sin that they have took.
Sin from my lips? Oh, trespass sweetly urged. Give me my sin again.
You kiss by the book.
So I'm going to stop here to say, so she tells him he kisses by the book. That is to say, it's an insult that's meant to be flirtatious. You kiss like you studied how to kiss in a manual. Later on, when Mercutio is fatally wounded by Tybalt, Mercutio, dying, says to Romeo, how the hell did he get at me? He's the guy who studied how to fence in a book. You'll see. We'll read it tonight in a manual. She means it as a kind of put down that is meant to be encouraging. And you notice she says it, that half line, right after he says, give me my sin again. He's figured out a way, he's a 16-year-old boy, to kiss her twice. They're going to kiss twice at the very end of the play when they're dying. But I'll show you that when he begins by saying, if I profane with my unworthy hand, together they begin a sonnet. 14 lines, look at the rhymes of the end lines after exit. Hand, this, stand, kiss, much, this, touch, kiss, to, prayer, do, despair, sake, take. Together they make a sonnet when they first meet. It's like a verbal pas de deux. They're in love. One of the ways you know that this is not just lovesickness and flirtation is that they're witty. They make a sonnet together, and they figure out, she says, yeah, you use lips to pray. He says, I've got another way to use lips. And when he says she has you kissed by the book, you know that if he was left to his own devices, he'd figure out another way to kiss her, but they're interrupted by the nurse. That is, the nurse interrupts the second sonnet. Look after kissing her. Purged, took, urged, book. They're about to do a second sonnet when the nurse interrupts. And when Romeo says, what is her mother, you see the half line is matched immediately by the nurse saying, marry, bachelor, her mother is the lady of the house. This is bad news. So we'll pick up with Juliet reading again, You Kiss by the Book.
You kiss by the book.
We have a nurse.
Madame, your mother craves a word with you.
What is her mother?
Marry, bachelor. Her mother is the lady of the house, and a good lady, and a wise and virtuous. I nursed her daughter, that you talked with all, and on my life hath stolen from home to bed. I nursed her daughter that you talked with all. I tell you, he that lay hold of her shall have the chinks.
Is she a Capulet? Oh, dear account, my life is my foe's debt.
Okay, so my line is next, but you notice that the nurse identifies her as a Capulet and says, the person who laid hold of her shall have the chinks. Now, your note says that person shall have acquire a family fortune. We have no young people here, right? You'll do. How old are you? Okay, you had to think about it, but that's okay. So, that I asked if we had young people here? I'm about to explain a bawdy pun, and 16 will do. That's my only point. I didn't want an 8-year-old behind me. I can't see everyone behind me. That's the point. Yeah. So in Shakespeare's day, chink and clink meant the same thing, and so chinks meant clinking money. Someone who had the chinks had money in their pocket or gold. But the nurse is very bawdy, and another meaning of cheek, even today, is a small opening, such as women have. And so when the nurse says, he that can lay hold of her shall have the chinks, will get a lot of money, and also her virginity. That's the pun that she's making. Now, Romeo is so horrified to learn that it's a Capulet that he finishes the half line by saying, is she a Capulet? Oh, my dear account, my life is my foe's debt. He picks up the non-bawdy meaning of it. The nurse says, this person will have a lot of money. He says, oh, dear account, the reckoning, my life is my foe's debt. My ledger sheet shows me that I'm in deep trouble. So I want to show you that the nurse introduces the bawdiness. Romeo only hears the one half of it, the financial half of it, which he turns into a metaphor. Benvolio, away be gone, the sport is at the best.
So I fear, the more is my unrest.
Nay, gentlemen, prepare not to be gone. We have a trifling foolish banquet towards. Is it even so? Why then, I thank you all. I thank you, honest gentlemen. Good night. More torches here. Come on then, let's to bed. Ah, sirrah, by my fate, it waxes late. I'll to my rest.
Now you notice that that half line is not finished by a half line. Do you see that? I'll to my rest. Why? Because the rest of the time is people leaving. And it's a compositive way of saying the nurse, Juliet, should not speak immediately thereafter. People should be leaving because she's going to comment on 3 people who are leaving. She doesn't care about the first person, Tiberio. She doesn't care about the second person, Petruchio. She only cares about the third. But so as not to call attention to the one she's interested in, she asks about all 3. Tom, Dick, and Romeo. Okay, so there's a pause while people leave, and then Juliet.
Come hither, nurse. What is yon gentleman?
The son and heir of old Tiberio.
What's he that now is going out the door?
Marry, that I think, a young Petruchio.
What's he that follows there that would not dance?
No, not.
You see, again, there's no continuation. I know not. So again, the director will do what the director wants, but that's a way of saying that Juliet is now pausing over that and takes some time. I don't mean hours, but more than immediate response to say, go ask his name.
Ask his name. If he be married, my grave is like to be my wedding bed.
One of many foreshadowings of death, because her grave will be her wedding bed, effectively.
His name is Romeo, and a Montague, the only son of your great enemy.
My only love sprung from my only hate. Too early seen unknown and known too late. Prodigious birth of love it is to me that I must love a low enemy.
What's this? What's this?
A rhyme I learned even now of one I danced withal.
Anon, anon, come, let's away, the strangers are all gone.
So when Juliet says that quatrain that is often used as an example of oxymoron, yoked opposites, my only love sprung from my only hate, and so on, she's talking to herself. She doesn't want the nurse to know that she's infatuated with Romeo. When the nurse says, what's this? What's this? Meaning, what did you just say? Immediately, Juliet, she completes the half line. A rhyme I learned even now of one I danced withal. She didn't dance with Romeo. She's trying not to let the nurse know that she's infatuated with Romeo. And as soon as she says the half line of one I danced withal, the nurse says, let's go, let's go, let's go, let's go. But not before she has the foreboding of her wedding bed being the grave, if she's not to marry him, and then the fact that she must love a loathed enemy. And because she marries him, it gets even worse. So that's the first scene, the last scene of the first act, the first scene we're looking at tonight. I want to say that the notion of how dark this play is not only carried in the opening prologue, which is a sonnet, which talks about there being star-crossed lovers, a phrase that you've heard many times. But it also talks about their death-marked love, much darker than star-crossed lovers. You know, star-crossed lovers might not end up happily ever after. They may never marry. Death-marked love is pretty dark. And you know from the very opening that this is the nature of the play. But the sonnet, which you can look at on page 1 at your leisure, is loaded with the elemental oppositions of tragedy. The words ancient and new, their life, their death, love and rage, parents and children, continuance and end. Comedy is on the side of continuance. Tragedy says whether you like it or not, things end. Many of you know the movie Shakespeare in Love, co-written by Tom Stoppard. One of the great plays about Shakespeare, about Romeo and Juliet, which is partly performed in it, and about Shakespearean comedy. More than one character says in the course of that play, it all turns out all right at the end. Nobody knows why. It just does. That's the hope of comedy. Wait a while. Things will get better. Monty Python. Get a sense of my literary background. And the Holy Grail. The judges are told that this woman's a witch, and the man accusing her of being a witch says, she turned me into a newt. He's a human being. The judge says, you don't look like a newt. I got better. In the tragic world of medieval myth, you don't get better when you're turned into a newt. But in the comic world of fairy tales, you kiss a frog, he becomes a prince. In Monty Python, you get better. In comedy, you get better, but not in tragedy. And if you say why, it's just the way the world is. They're mutually exclusive views, but they can be held by the same person. We all have tragic and comic views of life. Shakespeare wrote many comedies and tragedies. So now we're going to look at the scene that I refer to, which is Act 3, Scene 1, page 44 in Dover, where Tybalt comes in wanting to pick a fight with Romeo and not wanting to fight with Mercutio because he's out for Romeo. Why? Because Romeo crashed the party the night before. And we're going to read from the top of 44 where it says 3 lines down, enter Tybalt and others. And if our Tybalt is still willing to be our Tybalt, who's our Tybalt? Would you continue? No, I'll get other, but you'll do it again. Romeo, will you continue as Romeo? And now I need a Benvolio, somebody feeling good-natured. You don't have to be, it's acting, yes. And I need a Mercutio, somebody want to feel hot-tempered? And it doesn't end well for you, but you get some good lines. Will someone be Mercutio? If you're behind me, call out. Okay, we've got a Mercutio. So we're picking up, this is Act 3, Scene 1, so you not only need to know that they've had the balcony scene, but they've gotten married secretly by Friar Lawrence. When Romeo goes to Friar Lawrence, he says, you'll be glad to know I'm no longer in love with Rosaline. He says, very good, I'm glad you got over that. I now want to marry Juliet. And Friar Lawrence is amazed, and Romeo says, I thought you wanted me to bury my love. Yes, but I didn't want you to pick another one out. This image of the love being associated with graves again in the scene that we're not going to see. So we know that Romeo is married to Juliet, but no one else in the play knows it. No one else in the scene knows it. So Tybalt comes in, but Benvolio speaks first.
By my head, here come the Capulets.
By my heel, I care not.
Follow me close, where I will speak to them. Gentlemen, good then, a word with one of you.
And but one word with one of us, couple it with something. Make a word of the blow.
You shall find me apt enough to that, sir, and you will give me occasion.
Could you not take some occasion without giving?
Mercutio, thou consortest with Romeo.
Consort, what dost thou make us? Minstrels? And thou make minstrels of us, look to hear nothing but discords. Here's my fiddlestick. Here's that shall make you dance. Sound, consort.
So I'm going to stop here for a moment to say, remember, Tybalt is not looking to fight with Mercutio. He wants to fight with Romeo. That's why he says, I'm not going to argue with you. When Tybalt says, Mercutio, thou consortest with Romeo, he's about to say, you are of Romeo's party. Can you tell me where to find him? You hang out with Romeo. Mercutio, who's looking to pick a fight because he's mercurial, he's hot-tempered, says consort. Now, a consort is also a group of musicians. Dost thou make us minstrels? And minstrels are menials. They're working men. If thou make us minstrels of us, and in Elizabethan time means if. So when Tybalt says, you shall find me apt enough to that, sir, if you will give me occasion. An meant if in Elizabethan times. If you want to make minstrels, look to hear nothing but discords. And there's a pun, even as he's angry. You're going to hear bad chords, and you're going to hear discords. I'm going to argue with you. Here's my fiddlestick, and he pulls out his sword. Here's my fiddlestick that will make you dance. Zounds, his wounds, Christ's wounds, consort. You see how hot-tempered he is. We saw how hot-tempered Tybalt is. Bad combination for peace. Benvolio tries to exercise common sense. Benvolio?
We talk here in the public haunt of men. Either withdraw unto some private place, or reason coldly of your grievances, or else depart. Here all eyes gaze on us.
Men's eyes were made to look, and let them gaze. I will not budge for no man's pleasure, God.
And there's the audacity and the obstinacy. In a scene we have not seen, the Duke has come out to say there have been so many brawls of late that if there's another one, the person causing it will be put to death or exiled. That's why Benvolio says, look, if we're going to fight, let's not do it in public. And Mercutio says, I don't care, let people watch. So we know he's just as reckless as Tybalt, and before this scene is over, they're both going to wind up dead. Theirs is partly a tragedy of character. They could be more even-tempered, and they're not. Enter Romeo and Tybalt.
Well, peace be with you, sir. Here comes my man.
But I'll be hanged, sir, if you wear your livery, marry and go before to field. He'll be your follower. Your worship, in that sense, may call him man.
And I'll interrupt for another time here and then let the scene take over. Mercutio is punning because it's the nature for him to be angry and clever at the same time. It's also Shakespeare's nature to pun constantly. So when Tybalt says, peace be with you, he means, I don't need you anymore, Mercutio. Here's the man I've been looking for. Here's my man. Mercutio, who's still looking to pick up a fight, says, I'll be hanged if he wear your livery. I'll be hanged if he becomes your manservant and wear the livery of your house. He's punning on man. But if you go before to field, he'll be your follower. If you try to run away, he'll chase you. And in that sense, you may call him man. That is someone heroic. Three meanings of man. Here's my guy. Here's my man. I'll be damned if he's your man, your servant. But if you try to run away, he'll be man enough to follow you. All in 4 lines from a guy who also wants to fight and is carrying a sword. This is Shakespeare.
Romeo, the love I bear thee can afford no better term than this. Thou art a villain.
Tybalt, the reason I have to love thee doth not much excuse the appertaining rage to such a greeting. Villain am I none. Therefore farewell. I see thou knowest me not.
Boy, this shall not excuse the injuries that thou hast done me. Therefore turn and draw.
I do protest, I never injured thee, but love thee better than thou canst devise, till thou shalt know the reason of my love.
They're in-laws.
And so, good captain, which name I tender, as dearly as mine own, be satisfied.
O calm, dishonorable, vile submission, while the staccato carries it away. Tybalt, you rat catcher, will you walk?
What wouldst thou have with me?
Good king of cats, nothing but one of your 9 lives, that I mean to make bold withal, and as you shall use me hereafter, driving the rest of the 8. Will you pluck your sword out of his filter by the ears? Make haste, lest mine be about your ears ere it be out.
Now you notice that's in prose. Mercutio talks there in prose just as he talked in prose when he said, are you calling me minstrels? He's so angry, he no longer talks in verse. So across the page, when he said consort, you call us minstrels, it's in prose. Here again, it's in prose. It's a hallmark of how angry he is. Down near the bottom of the page, when he's wounded, he's going to talk in prose again because he's dying.
I am for you.
Gentle Mercutio, put thy rapier up.
Come, sir, your passado.
Draw, Benvolio, beat down their weapons, gentlemen, for shame, forbear this outrage. Tybalt, Mercutio, the prince expressly hath forbid this bandying in Verona streets. Hold, Tybalt, good Mercutio.
I am hurt, a plague on both your houses. I am sped. Is he gone and hath nothing?
What? Art thou hurt?
So I'll stop again to say, a plague on both your houses is spoken 3 times here by Mercutio. You see that when Tybalt says at near the top third, I am for you, and then Romeo says, gentle Mercutio, put thy rapier up, comes through your prasado. None of those short lines are followed because they're fighting. Somebody's drawing, someone's fighting. But when Romeo says, hold Tybalt, good Mercutio, that line's not completed. Immediately, Mercutio says, I am hurt. You see the indentation? Because it happens like that, because he's cheated by going under the intervener's arm. In the same way that when Mercutio says, I am sped, I am done for, is he gone and hath nothing? Benvolio says immediately, what, art thou hurt? Nobody saw him get stabbed. And so when Mercutio says, is he gone and he has nothing, Benvolio knows immediately he must be wounded. And the half line carry the emotion of being so sudden in response. So Mercutio, I, a scratch.
I, a scratch, a scratch. Mary, 'tis enough. Where's my page? Go, villain, fetch a surgeon.
Courage, man, the hurt cannot be much.
No, 'tis not so deep as a well, nor so wide as a church door. 'Tis enough. 'Twill serve. Ask for me tomorrow, and you shall find me a grave man.
Punning again.
I am peppered, I warned, for this world. Plague on both your houses. Zounds, a dog, a rat, a mouse, a cat, to scratch a man to death. A braggart, a rogue, a villain, that fights by the book of arithmetic. Why the devil came you between us? I was hurt under your arm.
I thought all for the best.
That's the idealist. I thought I was doing a good thing. And you hear how pathetic the line, I thought all for the best. And notice it's not picked up by another half line. It's fatal. I was doing the best I can, and there's nobody to talk immediately afterwards. Mercutio doesn't even respond to him.
Help me into some house, Benvolio, or I shall faint. A plague on both your houses. They have made worm's meat of me. I have it, and soundly too, your houses.
This gentleman, the prince's near ally, my very friend, hath got this mortal hurt in my behalf. My reputation stained with Tybalt's slander. Tybalt that an hour hath been my kinsman. O sweet Juliet, thy beauty hath made me effeminate. And my temper softly valor steals.
Oh, Romeo, Romeo, brave Mercutio's dead. That gallant spirit hath aspired to clouds, which too untimely here did scorn the earth.
This day's black fate on more days doth depend. This that begins the woe, others must end.
So there's a couplet. We haven't seen him speak in couplet. And there's his knowing, his foreshadowing, that this is going to get worse before it gets better.
Here comes the furious Tybalt back again.
Alive in triumph, and Mercutio slain, away to heaven respective lenity, and fire-eyed fury be my conduct now. Now, Tybalt, take the villains back again. That late thou gavest me for Mercutio's soul is but a little way above our heads, staying for thine to keep him company. Either thou or I or both must go with him.
Thou, wretched boy that used this sword in here, shalt with him hence.
This shall determine that.
So we'll stop a moment to say that when he says, Mercutio, take the villain, you see the quotation marks, back again, that late thou gavest me. You called me villain, take it back. Well, a couple of scenes ago, he said, I'll take back the kiss that he gave Juliet. Now he's talking to Juliet's cousin and saying, take back the name. The one is romance, the other is rage. Do you see the parallelism? Just as she says you kiss by the book, and Mercutio says Tybalt fences by the book. Those parallelisms give you a sense again of the structure of the play. So they fight, Tybalt falls. Benvolio?
Romeo, away, be gone. The citizens are up and Tybalt slain. Stand not amazed, the prince will doom thee death. If thou art taken, hence be gone away.
Oh, I am fortune's fool.
And we'll stop at that point, but the tide has now turned. The man who was a lover is now a killer. The man who wanted to protect Tybalt because they were related has now killed him. He says, I am fortune's fool. I am the fool of fate. Why? Because, again, he could not reveal his marriage because of the feuding families. In Act 4, Scene 4 of King Lear, Lear says, I am even the natural fool of fortune. But Lear is also a collaborator in his tragedy in a much more significant way than Romeo. So now we're going to jump ahead to Act 5, Scene 3 at the churchyard tomb. And for the first part of this scene, we're going to read parts of this scene, early, middle, and late. We need, Romeo, will you continue? And then we need a Paris. Is someone willing to be a Paris? Paris is the young man, will you be Paris? Thank you, who is betrothed by the Capulet parents to wed Juliet. And it's Paris's engagement that leads Juliet to fake her death because she can't tell them she's already married. So we have a Romeo, we have a Paris. We need a page, a servant to Paris. Thank you. And we need a Balthazar who's a servant to Romeo. No one? Will you be a Balthazar? We're on page 84. Sorry if I didn't say that. I don't think I did. We're on page 84. We're going to read this churchyard scene where, let me set the stage for you because I'll try to interrupt less, but Romeo has heard, mistakenly, that Juliet is dead. Paris, who was engaged, remember, Romeo's married to her. Paris believes she's dead because that was the whole reason she faked her death. Paris is coming to the family tomb of the Capulets. He was a near in-law in order to spread water and flowers at the graveside of his fiancée. There's every reason why he should be there. He shouldn't be afraid to be there. He shouldn't be worried. But he is, because he's a punk. It's an Elizabethan term. There's nothing heroic about him. Romeo, who is coming with a crowbar to open up the tomb so that he can see the face of Juliet again, is an interloper. He's trespassing on the property of his enemies. He is fearless. It shows you how far he's come. When Paris talks about why he's there, he talks in the generalized language of love and elegy. Romeo says, I want to see her face. You hardly know who Juliet is from listening to Paris. You'll see also that Paris tells his servant, go over there and listen in case anybody comes, even though there's no reason why he should be afraid. Romeo says to his servant, you'll see side-by-side scenes, get out of here, and if you hang around, I'll kill you. That is, even though I may need your help, even though I'm going to do this on my own, in the same way that Juliet said, I'm going to take this potion on my own. So you have the boy who has now become a hero, and Paris, this nobleman who's acting like a kid. That's what I want you to get out of this parallel. So they enter. You see that Paris is bearing flowers and a torch, and down below Romeo is with a torch and mattock. In this edition, it says the page is the one bearing flowers and a torch, and Paris is also bringing scented water. So he has scented water and flowers. Romeo has a torch and a mattock. One's bringing water, one fire, one flowers, one a crowbar. So, Paris.
Give me thy torch, boy, hence, and stand aloof. Yes, put it out, for I would not be seen, under yon yew trees, lay ye all along. Holding thine ear close to the hollow ground, so shall no foot upon the churchyard tread, being loose and firm with digging up of graves. But thou shalt hear it whistle then to me, a signal that thou hearest something approach. Give me those flowers, do as I bid thee, go.
I'm almost afraid to stand alone here in the churchyard, yet I will adventure.
Sweet flower, with flowers thy bridal bed I strew. O woe, thy canopy is dust and stones, which with sweet water nightly I will dew, or wanting that with tears to still thy moans. The obsequies that I for thee will keep, nightly shall be to strew thy grave.
And then the page whistles, interrupting the poem. You notice it's a poem. Strew stones, do moans, keep wheat.
The boy gives warning, something doth approach. What cursed foot wanders this way tonight, to cross my obsequies and true love's right? What, with a torch? Muffle me night a while.
So he hides.
Take this letter. Early in the morning, see thou deliver it to my Lord and Father. Give me the light upon my life, I charge thee. Whatever thou hearest or seest, stand all aloof, and do not interrupt me in my course.
So I'm going to interrupt. One tells the servant to go away and listen. The other one says, don't interrupt me. You see the parallel, Paris, Page, Romeo, Balthazar. You see at the top of where we began that Paris said, hence and stand aloof, and Romeo says, stand all aloof. They are doubles of each other. One of them is heroic, one of them is cowardly.
Why I descend into this bed of death is partly to behold my lady's face, but chiefly to take thence from her dead finger a precious ring, a ring that I must use in dear employment, therefore hence, be gone. But if thou, jealous, dost return to pry, in what I farther shall intend to do, by heaven I will tear thee joint by joint, and strew this hungry churchyard with thy limbs. The time and my intents are savage wild, more fierce and more inexorable far than empty tigers or the roaring sea.
We've come a long way from, I did my best. No, really. I was just trying to stop. What can I tell you? I tried to stop. He is now a man. And when he says, by heaven, I will tear thee joint from joint and strew this hungry churchyard with thy limbs, he's not only not the Romeo we saw earlier, he's not Paris. And that's the point.
I will be gone, sir, and not trouble you.
So shalt thou show me friendship. Take thou that.
Give them a tip.
Live and be prosperous, and farewell, good fellow.
For all the same, I'll hide me hereabout. His looks I fear, and his intent I doubt.
So I want to stop again. The page has said across the page, I'm almost afraid to stand alone, but I'll take that chance. Balthazar has just been told by Romeo, if I find you here, I'll rip you to shreds. And he says, all the same, I'm going to hide myself. I'm worried about my master. We know something about Romeo from when Capulet says, Verona says he's a good guy. We know something about Romeo from how Balthazar, a very minor character, treats him. In King Lear, Cornwall, one of the villainous sons-in-law, is blinding Gloucester by kicking out, stepping out one eye after the other. And after he steps out the first eye of Gloucester, one of his servants, who just called servant number one, takes out his sword and says to Cornwall, my lord, I have served you ever since I was a child, but better service have I never done you than now to bid you hold. That is, the world is so topsy-turvy that I serve you best by opposing you, because the servant is answering to a higher order. I'm a better servant by disobeying you. That's what Balthazar is saying. My master even gave me money to leave, but I'm going to stay because I'm worried about him. It tells us something about Balthazar, but it also tells you something about Romeo.
Thou detestable maw, thou womb of death, scourged with the dearest morsel of ear. Thus I enforce thy rotten jaws to open, and despite I'll cram thee with more food.
This is that vanished haughty Montague that murdered my love's cousin, with which grief it is supposed the fair creature died. He here is come to do some villainous shame to the dead bodies. I will apprehend him. Stop thy unhallowed toil, thou Montague. And vengeance be pursued further than death. Condemn, villain, I do apprehend thee. Obey and go with me, that I must die.
So he misreads the scene. Romeo is not there to pursue vengeance farther than death. He's there to pursue love farther than death. That's the beauty of the play. Paris doesn't understand that, and so he misreads the scene. We know why Romeo is there. He wants to see the face of his lady. You notice that Paris makes no reference to Juliet as a person. She's just a type. Romeo.
I must indeed, and therefore came I hither. Good, gentle youth, tempt not a desperate man. Fly hence and leave me. Think upon these gone. Let them affright thee. I beseech thee, youth. Put not another sin upon my head, by urging me to fury. Oh, be gone. By heaven, I love thee better than myself, for I come hither armed against myself. Stay not, be gone. Live, and hereafter say, the madman's mercy bid thee run away.
For the second time in the play, he's trying to save a man's life by having him not fight. And for the second time, he's going to be unsuccessful. Paris is going to fight him, and he's going to have to kill Paris just as he killed Tybalt.
I do defy thy computations, and apprehend thee for a felon here. Wilt thou provoke me? Then have it be, boy.
O Lord, they fight. I will go call the watch.
Oh, I am slain. If thou be merciful, open the tomb, lay me with Juliet.
And we'll stop there. Romeo has a long speech here in which he, in fact, does lay him by the tomb. And so the open tomb, again, it will depend on the staging, has Tybalt, who has been buried in the family tomb, Juliet, who seems dead but is not, and Paris, who's actually dead. So 2 men killed by Romeo, and the woman that he loves apparently dead. He has a long speech that we won't read, but at the end of it, near the top of page 87, he talks about 8 lines down, come, bitter conduct. The poison is his conduct, his conduit to death, and it's bitter. It's an unsavory, a distasteful guide. Thou desperate pilot, now at once run on the dashing rocks, thy seasick, weary bark wrecked the ship of my body. Here's to my love, he drinks, O true apothecary, thy drugs are quick, thus with a kiss I die. And it doesn't tell you in the directions, but he kisses her. And she's going to kiss him, again, repeating the double kiss at the beginning. So we're going to pick up now on page 88. Romeo is actually dead. Juliet is apparently dead. Friar Lawrence has come too late. Why is he too late? It's a tragedy. He's going to be late. Why is there a quarantine that stops Friar John from getting... It's a tragedy. That's the way it is. So we're going to need, for this scene, we'll continue with our Juliet. Who's our Juliet? Just thank you. And we need a Friar Lawrence. Thank you. And there's a single line from the first watch, which I will do. So the point you want to emphasize here is Friar Lawrence comes talking about this place, this tomb, as a place of peace. And as soon as he gets scared, he says instead that it is a nest of death. It's a place of peace. He's a holy man. But as soon as he's frightened, it's a nest of death. He's afraid, but Juliet is not. Just as Paris was afraid, but Romeo was not. That's what I want you to see from this scene. Friar Lawrence, Romeo.
Alack, alack, what blood is this which stains the stony entrance of the sepulchre? Who use these matchless and gory swords to write a story by this place of peace? Romeo, O pale, who else? What, Paris too? Steeped in blood? Ah, what an unkind hour is guilty of this lamentable chance.
And the half line is not completed because she needs time to wake up. Juliet wakes.
O comfortable friar, where is my lord? I do remember well where I should be. And there I am. Where is my Romeo?
I hear some noise, lady. I hear some noise. Lady, come from that rest of death. Contagion on natural sleep. Greater power than we can contradict hath thwarted our intents. Come, come away. Thy husband in thy bosom, fair lies dead. Paris too. Come, I'll dispose of thee among the sisterhood of holy nuns.
That's a nice invitation.
Stay not to question, for the watch is coming. Come, go, good Juliet. I dare no longer stand.
Go, get thee hence, for I will not away. What's here, a cup? Closed in my true love's hand. Poison I see, half thin his timeless end. O churl, drunk all, and left no friendly drop to help me after? I will kiss thy lips. Haply some poison yet doth hang on them, to make thee die with a restorative. Thy lips are warm.
And she kisses him, so there's the double kiss, repeating from the beginning. Thy lips are warm is not continued because there's time for her to kiss him on the first watch. Oh, I'm sorry, the lead boy does. Lead boy, which way?
A noise, then I'll be brief. Oh, happy dagger. This is my thy sheath. There, rust, and let me die.
And she stabs herself and dies. So before we see the very last scene, now that they're both dead, you see how her maturity is reflected in her saying, get thee hence, for I will not away. She is not yet 14. Her birthday is just a few days away, the play tells us. She has grown up the way Romeo has grown up. And in their doubleness, that is their coupleness, they crisscross in their death in this way. She has been given a phony poison to pretend death, but Romeo actually kills himself with poison. That is, he kills himself with the way she apparently killed herself. And she kills herself with his dagger. He dies like a woman. You understand what I mean? And he dies like a man. He dies with the real version of her poison, and she dies with his dagger, crisscross in death. It's part of the doubleness in the poetry of the play. Star-crossed, right. And remember, when you see the play or when you read the play, when she's in that scene where she's taking the phony poison, she has a knife with her, she says, in case it doesn't work. She'd rather actually be dead than have to marry somebody other than Romeo. So now we're going to look at the last scene of the play, last page, page 92. We had a Capulet before. Where's our Capulet? Old man Capulet. You're still Capulet. We need a Montague, head of the Montague family. Thank you. You'll be Montague. And we need a prince. Thank you. So it is a convention in Elizabethan drama, not just Shakespearean drama, that in tragedies especially, the last person to speak is the person who has the highest moral or social status in the play. The prince is going to speak last. He's going to speak on behalf of civic peace. No small thing. Think about the world now and how many countries are torn by strife. A lot of people are dead. Again, Tybalt, Mercutio, Romeo, Juliet, Paris, and Mrs. Montague, all dead. We find out she dies of grief hearing that Romeo is in exile. But the Verona will no longer be torn by strife, and that's a good thing. Not good enough to offset the deaths, but still loss and gain. So we're going to pick up, the friar has explained everything and given the prince a letter in a dramatic fashion. The prince reads the letter in an instant and understands everything. So we're picking up about 10 lines down where the prince says, "This letter doth make good the friar's words."
This letter doth make good the friar's words. Their course of love, the tidings of her death. Here he writes that he did buy a poison, a poor apothecary, and therewithal came to this vault to die, and lie with Juliet. Where be these enemies, Capulet, Montague? See what a scourge is laid upon your hate, that heaven finds means to kill your joys with love. And I, for waking at your discords too, have lost a brace of kinsmen. All are punished.
O brother Montague, give me thy hand. This is my daughter's joint, for no more can I demand.
I can give thee more, for I will raise her statue in pure gold. As well as Verona by that name is known, there shall no figure at such rank be set as that of true and faithful Juliet.
As rich shall Romeo's by his lady's lie, poor sacrifices of our enmity.
So the houses are married, effectively. They use the dowry. They put up a statue of Juliet. There is a statue of Juliet in Verona. They didn't put it up, but it's there now. And the families have come together in the wedding that they wouldn't allow in real life. The prince gets the last word.
A glooming peace this morning with it brings. The sun for sorrow will not show his head. Go hence to have more talk of these sad things. Some shall be pardoned, and some punished. For never was a story of more woe than this of Juliet and her Romeo.
And you hear the kind of half sonnet, and you read it right with punished, brings head, things shed. For never was a story of more woe than this of Juliet and her Romeo. And what's the most significant thing about the end? No last names. No Montague, no Capulet. Romeo and Juliet. You learned something you didn't know, right? That's the deal. See the play. There's a schedule behind me. There's nothing better than seeing Shakespeare in performance if you want to learn Shakespeare. The production will make lots of changes. I haven't seen it from what I've said here. That's the nature of any dramatic production. Things may be cut or moved around, new interpretations. One of the things that's interesting is Shakespeare remade his sources. This is not the poem that Arthur Brooke wrote. You may not see an Elizabethan version of Shakespeare. You'll still see Romeo and Juliet, and one of the ways you expand your knowledge is to see what a modern, a 21st century interpretation of the play is. I hope this was worth your hour and 15 minutes. I thank all the readers, and see you at the play. Thanks.